Thanks very much for coming, everyone. I realise that the other talk that's going on is quite compelling, so I'm very, very grateful to you all for coming. My name is Geoff Lee. I'm the Learning and IT Services Manager for Edinburgh College of Art, so I manage the IT team there. I've been a Mac admin in one form or another for over 20 years. So I manage the IT team in a largish art college, which is part of a largish university. And I also work as part of the virtual team, which manages the macOS infrastructure for the entire university. Just to give you an idea of where we are at the moment, we have almost finished migrating all of our staff machines from an in-house system which was used to manage them for the previous 10 years. We've had a project to migrate them to JAMF, which is almost finished now. And we're about to start on a project to look at our labs. We have probably about 500 Mac lab machines across the university, which are managed by a very old bit of infrastructure, which is now end of life. We need to get new hardware in. So we're about to start on a project to rebuild our lab management infrastructure, essentially, on JAMF and using 10.13. So I'm talking today at a point where we have some lessons learned, I think, from the staff project that we've almost completed now, and we're looking to take them into the labs project that we're about to kick off. So what I'm going to talk about, I'll give an overview of where we're coming from and the sort of environment in which we're trying to develop a new service. So I'll take a quick look at what I mean by release management. I'm sure that will be helpful at some point in this talk. We will get to it, so don't worry. And then really what I'm mostly going to talk about and demonstrate a couple of tools to help with is some patterns that I think it's very helpful to encourage in colleagues to enable the sort of participation that we're looking for in the development project. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but the patterns that I'm going to go into in a little bit of detail are the idea of tagging your code, having some coding standards, using templates to make these things easier, and the general idea of having some release control around your service. And then putting that all together, I've got a couple of demos of two different tools that I've developed over the past few months, which we've been using as part of our staff project, which we're taking into the lab project, one of which takes the pain of following these patterns away from sort of deployed tools and scripts and things that we deploy to our client machines, and another one helps with these patterns when it comes to scripts that we're deploying to, in our case, the JAMF JSS, but it could be scripts that you're deploying to any kind of management infrastructure. So, talking a little bit about the environment that we find ourselves in currently, we're going to be moving our labs from mostly, I know, 10.10 into a new 10.13 build. And the way we're approaching this is having a virtual team. We're building on a model that has been pretty successful for the staff side of things, by running it as a sort of open source project, effectively. So we've got a new tool chain, a chance to reevaluate the way we do things. We've got a lot of scripts and configuration to write, test, debug, and deploy. And yes, the real hope with open sourcing this thing is that we can pull in the knowledge from the people in places like physics and engineering who have been managing Macs for a long time and who know what they need to do, and will not use a central service unless it does what they need to do. The way we hope to encourage that is by getting them to participate in the creation of the thing itself. So just a brief taster of where we're coming from. So this is our previous configuration management system, which is a thing called LCFG. It was entirely text-based. It was very highly devolvable, which was a good thing and a bad thing. So that meant that if I'm using this system and I'm in an area and I'm in my own school, I can do absolutely anything I want with it, really. I don't have to take any kind of central configuration that's being configured in the system. I can set my school up as its own little unit and do what I want, which is great from the point of view of flexibility, not so great from the point of view of trying to have a consistent environment for students and staff. It was completely open, entirely open source. It's on lcfg.org. But it has an incredibly steep learning curve. For someone who isn't a programmer coming to try and configure things in this system, at the very top of the page there, let's try this. Oh, there we go. The very top here, these things are C preprocessor macros, which, if you happen to be a C programmer, make a lot of sense. If you don't happen to be a C programmer, that's a whole world that you are suddenly going to have to learn to make much use of this configuration system. The whole thing is very text-based, based on included files. It's a little bit like Puppet in that it essentially uses a sort of domain-specific configuration language to say, we want these things on a machine to be set to these values, essentially. But the learning curve for using this was really, really steep. And perhaps most problematically, it's not used anywhere else. It was entirely homegrown in Edinburgh University. It is still used very successfully for managing thousands of Linux machines, which is what it was originally written for. But the Mac port of it was entirely specific to Edinburgh Uni. So this is the past. We have had a long project over a couple of years now to develop a JAMF infrastructure for our staff machines. We procured JAMF Pro. We know that's the way we're going to go. So onwards to the future. We're on JAMF Cloud, as it happens. So JAMF, most people are probably familiar with it. It's a web-based solution. It's far more accessible. There's a fantastic community. Hello. This was a huge change for us, moving away from a system which was pretty much entirely proprietary and sort of insulated within the university, to suddenly using a system where you can go onto Slack, you can go onto JAMF Nation, and you can really engage with other people who are solving the same kinds of problems as you are solving. So this has been a real revelation for us. It's in some sense an industry standard. I mean, there are other tools out there, but there's a relatively small set of tools which more or less everyone who is doing this kind of stuff uses, and that's been a huge use for us as well. However, certainly one thing that was very noticeable when we first brought it in was that it's quite limited in its ability to track and manage changes, which is not necessarily a failing of the tool itself, because the JAMF Pro tool, the JSS, is there for you to push configuration out to machines. But we were coming from a system where change management and to some extent release management was built in. You couldn't make a change without writing some sort of documentation for it, committing that, and everybody who was using the system being able to see it. So there was nothing like that built into JAMF. It does have what it slightly confusingly, I think, in this context calls change management logging. And if you use that feature on the JSS, you can see pretty much that something changed, and when it changed, and who changed it. And if you really dig into things, you might be able to find out what changed. Although, particularly importantly, from our point of view, if what changed was the content of a script, there's nothing in there to help you with that. It will just say the script object was altered. So we've got these fantastic tools, but we're going to need to build some sort of process and perhaps some extra tools around that, so that we can be sure that when we make a change, it's the change that we wanted to make. So I promised I would get to it. What is release management? Here's a lovely slide that I have clipped from ITIL, or ITIL. Those of you who are in higher education or government will certainly be familiar with ITIL. I'm not going to dwell on this really, other than to point out the difference between change management and release management, because I think these are terms that are often conflated, and what I'm talking about is really the stuff over here. So change management is really the process of deciding that you want to make a change, proposing a change, analysing the potential impact, prioritising it, seeking approval for it, making the plan, getting the authorisation, and then reviewing did it work. So that's change management. Actually doing the change, that's where release management comes in. So this is the sort of technical side of making the change. You're planning what the release is going to look like, you're building it, you're testing it, and then you're actually releasing the change from your development and test infrastructure into the live infrastructure. So that's from an ITIL point of view, where I'm coming from with release management. And I guess the way that I like to think about it is release management is being able to know that the changes that we make to our live infrastructure are the change we intended to make, and that they worked, and that they are fully documented, repeatable, and hopefully reversible. That's me. So that can be simple enough if there's just you or there's a small team which is managing the service, making all the changes, doing all the development and deployment. You can probably get by with documenting things as you go along, being careful when you copy and paste code from one environment to another. But it's not ideal, and if you want folk from elsewhere to be able to contribute to your service, to be able to point out where there's an improvement could be made or fix a bug, then you really need to think about how to make this stuff manageable, because simply using the JSS as a tool and changing things on the fly is going to get you into problems. So this got me thinking a bit about the change workflow and the patterns that are associated with that. So supposing we're running our service, we've identified a problem of some sort, perhaps it's coming from help desk, perhaps we've been alerted to something by our alerting system. So the first thing we think is, can we reproduce it? Is it a reproducible issue? Hopefully. So we'll maybe set something up in our development environment, get a development machine, try and get it into the same state as the state in which the problem was reported. Once we've reproduced it in our development environment, hopefully we can come up with a fix. We've come up with a fix, so what do? We deploy that to our test environment. And hopefully it tests out okay. At which point we think about deploying it to our live environment. So change management is sort of happening as part of that, somewhere sort of between made a fix and deploy to live. But I think this whole process is really what I'm talking about in terms of release management. Particularly, what we want to be sure of is that the thing that we made here, which fixed the problem, is the same thing that we deploy here. And again, this can be reasonably simple if it's just you and your dev and test environment are sort of all self-contained in one place. But as soon as there's a bunch of you trying to work on this, and you've got maybe a help desk over at the far end there, and you've got a different development environment or multiple development environments, and you want to be able to immediately get one of them into the right state, this can be a little bit tricky. And what if it doesn't work? We've got to go back and rinse and repeat. And so if we don't have an explicit process and some expected patterns around this stuff, we run the risk of wires getting crossed and information not being shared in the way that maybe we would like. So thinking about the sorts of patterns that we want to encourage in the people who are collaborating with us and developing this service. Repeatable builds. I think hopefully we've all drunk the Kool-Aid on repeatable builds. The link there is for Autopackage. I imagine most people are familiar with Autopackage. The idea of using Autopackage for everything and the reality of using Autopackage for everything are often very different things. But what I hope to show in a couple of slides' time is that using Autopackage, at the very least for everything that we have built ourselves, is absolutely easy and absolutely the right thing to do. So we shouldn't be deploying anything to our client machines that hasn't been built in a 100% repeatable way. Now that might not be Autopackage, but Autopackage is a great tool for doing this with. Consistent versioning, which again seems simple. You can call a version of something anything you want. Semantic versioning, a lot of people might have come across, is one way of looking at that. I'll have a quick slide about that in a minute or two. Coding standards, matter of great religious debate. Sounds kind of terrifying, particularly for those of us who aren't really programmers. And we think, my God, what are coding standards? What am I going to have to do? What am I going to have to learn to obey coding standards? However, there are tools to help with that, right? So there's a tool called PyLint, which you can run on a Python script, and it will tell you whether it conforms to this standard called PEP8. And PEP8 is a very simple set of guidelines around how to structure your code so that it is readable and understandable to other people. It won't make your code good, but it will ensure that you haven't just made something that looks a total mess. And I think that's really important when we're suggesting that we want other people to be able to come in and contribute code to the service. If we don't say up front we expect it to look like this, then how are they to know how we expect it to look? And then we're in a situation where they might have contributed something fantastic, but it doesn't fit in with our expected way of doing things. So these, I think, along with other things and appropriate processes, can really reduce the sort of friction and uncertainty in the development process, which, if you want to bring in people who might be a little bit unsure about what it is you're doing, is really important, I think. And if you're doing these things, changes become much easier to consider and understand. And critically, we're reducing single points of failure. So part of the tools that I'm going to talk about, what they will enable is for the things to be, to some extent, self-documenting, right? So there's no substitute for having really good comprehensive documentation of your service. But on the other hand, it's incredibly useful if everything that you're deploying is so clear and easy to understand and has an obvious rationale behind it, and the way that it works is clear, because it means that people, particularly say on the help desk, can understand the function of something without having to go away and consult the full service documentation, which, let's face it, probably doesn't get as updated as often as we would like. So a quick talk about tagging, consistent versioning. How do we go about having a consistent versioning strategy? Tagging in source control is an incredibly useful feature here. So tagging is a really simple concept. It gives us a way to record versions. And what it allows us to do is create a permanent reference to the state of your code repository at some specific point in time. You can give a tag any name you like, and you can create as many as you want. So you can see here, this is a picture of one of our GitHub pages. This is a repository of JSS scripts, which has a huge number of tags for reasons that will become clear. These are using semantic versioning, roughly, and you can have as many of them as you want. The really nice thing about that is it gives you something to refer to. So you can refer to a specific commit by its actual kind of SHA-1 hash in terms of Git. But when you're throwing a change backwards and forwards, when you're communicating in the team, if you have a tagged item in your source code repository, it's really, really easy to refer to that and say, look, this is the thing that I'm talking about. So source control is a really critical point here. Sorry, I'm forgetting to advance my slide. Source control is absolutely critical, I think, to having any kind of meaningful release control. It doesn't have to be Git. We happen to be using Git. In fact, we happen to be using GitHub. Because we want to be as open as possible. So we have some private repositories for the university, but we also have a whole bunch of open repositories where we're generally keeping stuff. This is part of trying to make the service as open and appealing to people as possible. But of course, Subversion, Mercurial, all your other kind of version control bits of software have the ability to tag releases. So this is key. Very quickly, just so that we have our terminology straight, semantic versioning, I think, is probably the most well-defined versioning scheme that you might want to use. You can adopt absolutely anything you like. The semantic versioning is documented at semver.org, and it consists of essentially 3 components. You can have more components on the end to specify certain things about the release, but you've got a major version, a minor version, and a patch version. So you can see the semantic versioning URL there for more information. So even just that basic starting to tag and version things means that we can sort of improve our workflow a little bit here. We can say, we have a problem, okay, what version of our code is causing that problem? So it's version 2.3 point something. We check out that version from our source control into our development environment to work out if we can reproduce it. Once we reproduced it in dev, great. Because we're using GitHub, we can now do things like update an issue report potentially in GitHub. We can open a ticket and do whatever we want to do, but we have a version to refer to now. So we made a fix, great. What do? We create a new tag. We can call that tag anything we want. We might call it 2.3 next release candidate 1. And then we deploy that fix to our test environment. And again, we can do that now using our source control repository. So in our test environment, we don't have to sort of copy and paste the fix from our development environment over to our test environment. We just go to our source control and we check out the tag that is our fixed version. It tested okay, cool. So now we make a new release. And the new release is going to be 2.3.n+1, assuming it hasn't made any incompatible changes, because that's how semantic versioning wants to work. So this I think is more scalable, and it's less spoffy. Spoff being single points of failure. So if there's less having to be held inside someone's head during this process. You could easily have multiple people now working on this process. We know what's going on. We can bring new people on board easily. This is something you can explain quite easily to new people. And we can lather, rinse, and repeat this. So if it doesn't work, fine, we go back and we do it again. We're at version 2.3.n+2. So, yeah, I really think this is not just for ITIL geeks. I had an ITIL slide, but this sort of way of working, I think, is just as important, if not more important, if you're a sole IT person. Because at some point, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to get bored and leave because you haven't got any friends, or you're going to get a new member of staff, which will be great. And in either of those instances, you're really going to want to have some sort of repeatable process that you can explain to people. So, to make it really simple, the sort of principles that we're trying to embed in our service at the moment are these ones. Everything we deploy to a client machine should be versioned and repeatably built. All of our scripts are in version control, kind of a corollary of the first one. And we should always know who changed what, when, and why it was changed. And we all use common patterns for development. And why I mean, what's the sort of the ultimate reason for all this is because ultimately for our users, this then means there's less chance of unexpected stuff occurring because we're in control of the changes that are happening. It makes the help desk more empowered. And we can fix problems faster. The worst possible experience for a user is that they have some kind of issue with their device. Help desk are helpless to troubleshoot it because they don't really understand how the service is put together and what things are supposed to do. Third line discovers they can't reproduce it because the device is in a kind of weird state and they're not really sure, so they have to get the user to bring it in. Management gives us the tools that we can use to prevent this being a problem, but we have to use them correctly. Just having JAMF Pro, for instance, doesn't prevent you from getting into a sort of unfortunate situation in terms of change management. So less firefighting then ultimately means more time to develop a quality service or a compelling platform, perhaps, given the talks that we had yesterday is how we should be referring to it. So, let's see, I've got about 15 minutes. I've got a couple of things to demo you. Cookie Cutter is a fantastic tool that I've recently discovered. It's basically a tool that will create a copy of a folder structure which you store in your version control somewhere. And in the process of doing that, it will template in various values either into the names of files or folders themselves or into the content of the files. And it's made even more powerful by the fact that you can run pre- and post-creation hooks on your templates. So you can have Cookie Cutter go off, do a bunch of stuff, then create a template, then do a bunch of extra setup on the template. So it can do pretty much anything, but in really simple cases, we can use it to automate away a lot of the perceived pain of dealing with version control, tags, testing, writing to code standards, etc., and allow people to concentrate on creating functionality, which is really what they probably want to be doing. GetJSS is a tool which I wrote pretty soon after, or at least I started to work on it pretty soon after we moved to JAMF. And what this does is allows you to push a script directly from your command line from your Git repository into the JSS. And it will put the Git changelog of the script into the notes field in the JSS, and it will allow you to template in a bunch of other useful information into the script. So you can template in values like the date of the last change, the user who changed it, and where the script actually lives in your version control software. So hopefully I've got time to quickly show you both of these. So talking about Cookie Cutter templates, I guess a lot of us have probably thought in the past, right, there's a problem there, I need to tweak a bunch of settings on some clients. I've got this one-liner or two-liner script that does it. I'll stick it in a file, I'll deploy it to the clients, I'll set up a launchd job to run it on login or at night or whatever. few days or weeks later, something else that I'd like to do, sort of at the same time, might as well just add it to that script. Before you know it, the script has grown into something that's quite ill-defined in terms of what it's supposed to be doing, and quite unmanageable. Perhaps you start to wish you'd added some option parsing because you want it to do different things in different situations. Suddenly it's not necessarily clear which version of the script is running on which client. So what if we could, with a minimum of effort, have some sort of basic scaffolding, some option parsing, some quality control around every admin script that we deploy, and make this hopefully reasonably effortless. So that's where the cookie cutter comes in. Cookie cutter is, as I mentioned, essentially a templating tool. And I've created this template called the PyMac tool template, which is a template. But it's a template with everything in it that you need to build and deploy a version-controlled script that does something, with option parsing, version number reporting, and some tests. The tests in the sample template basically test that you pass pilot, that you're adhering to PEP 8. The coolest thing, I think, about this is that it also includes an Autopackage recipe. So with a couple of commands, once you've put your functionality into the once you put your functionality into the tool, I keep forgetting to advance my slides. So yeah, we've got a couple of tests you can run down here. We've got this Autopackage recipe. So once you've built the thing, you've committed it to your version control, you can actually just run this Autopackage recipe, and it will build a package for you. It's a completely repeatable process, and it actually builds the package from the tagged release or the tagged version in your source control repository, so that you know that what you have built is 100% what's in your source control, and that's what you're going to deploy to client. So you just add functionality, build, and release. The way this is set up is that you add functionality into this file. If those of you who have never done Python programming, it's probably weirdly named. You really don't have to know why that it's structured the way it is. The documentation will tell you, but essentially you can add functionality into the main routine in that file there, and what you'll get is a command line tool and use a local bin that you can run on your clients, and you can just deploy to your clients. So release a new admin tool in 6 steps. I've actually got a demo for this, but we're getting a little bit short of time and I want to demo something else, so I will just run through it. If anybody wants to see the demo, come and talk to me afterwards. So the first thing we do is pip install cookie cutter, which is just the Python packaging utility. That gives us the cookie cutter command. Then we run the cookie cutter command, pointing it at our template. So the template lives in Git. It can live locally on the disk, or it can live in any version control repository you like. GH : is just a shortcut for GitHub that happens to be built into cookie cutter. So that will give us something that looks pretty much exactly like this. The next thing we can do is, using the standard Python build tools, we can run our tests. We can say python setup.py test. And what that will do is it will run any tests that are defined in this file. Again, this is much simpler than you might think. So to write a test, all you do is write a function that starts with the word test underscore and put some stuff in it. And this command will then run that test. And if it returns true, it passes. If it returns false, it fails. Great. So assuming we've now added the functionality to that init.py file, we want to make a release. So what does making a release consist of? It consists of incrementing the version number and committing that whole chunk to our version control and then tagging it. And that's what the release.sh script does. You can have a look in it. It's literally like 4 or 5 commands. It just makes your life a little bit easier. So if you type release.sh and then the word patch, it will increment the patch version and create a new release. If you type major, it will increment the major version and create a new release. What it won't do is then push that release up to your remote Git server, because I quite like that to be a manual conscious choice every time. So you do then have to do git push to push your new version up to the server. But as soon as you've done that, you can then use this Autopackage recipe. And this is a neat feature. I don't know if people use it. I discovered this while writing this talk. Autopackage has this feature -d, which allows you to run recipes from a local directory. So you don't even actually have to put the recipe in an Autopackage repository. You can, while you're in this directory, just type Autopackage run -d Autopackage recipes, which says look in that folder there for the recipe. Oh, that would not work actually because there's an extra S on there, but you see what I mean. And then the name of the project, or package, basically the name of that recipe. An Autopackage will go check out the release you just made from source control, build it, and give you a lovely package which looks like this. So the contents of this package, again, to anyone who's familiar with Python packaging, this will make perfect sense. To other people, it will be probably quite obscure. But this stuff at the top, this is the standard location for where a Python package gets installed. So all this means is that it gets installed into a sensible place. If somebody was looking for this code on a computer, it would be in the place they were expecting it. But also the build mechanism, without you having to have done anything or specifying this at all, has created a command line version of this tool and stuck it in user local bin. And you can then run that tool. If you run it with -v, it will tell you what version it currently is, and hopefully it will do whatever functionality you added into that init.py file. So I do have a demo which is only 5 minutes long, but as I say, I'm going to skip it, and I might come back to it if the other demo either doesn't work or is quicker than I expect. So GetJSS is the other tool that I wanted to show you. And this is bringing release management to our JSS scripts. So what it allows you to do is upload scripts directly from a Git repo to your JSS. So entirely on the command line. So you don't have to go log into the scripts interface and edit things in that little box, which I've always found a little bit scary. What you can do is locally on your machine, check out a script at a particular tag, Git to JSS, upload that tag, and it will upload it to the JSS. So this allows you to ensure that the deployed version matches the version in your source control. You're actually deploying from your source control rather than making a change and then sort of committing it retrospectively to source control, which I'm sure we've all done at various points in the past. And as I mentioned, it can template in other useful metadata. So you can have the script itself contain the change date, the location in Git, and who it was that made the change. The picture is nothing to do with anything. I just think it's incredibly cool. I'm going to do a quick demo. Hopefully this will work. The wired Wi-Fi has been temperamental this morning, so we'll give it a try. Let's see if I can get out of here, into here. Okay, so here I am. I'm on my machine. I'm in fact in...
You need the mirror.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Oh, I've not got a cursor. Where's my mouse? Yeah, here it comes. There we go. Okay, cool. So I'm currently in a directory which contains a whole bunch of scripts that we might want to deploy to our JSS. Sorry, I'll make this a bit bigger so you can actually see it. So I've got a script in here called core config software update run. Probably a lot of us have a similar script. It runs software update. It's actually a big and complicated script, this one, because it attempts to sort of allow the user to defer updates for a while and do various things. So it's a good script to demonstrate this with because it has a lot of change history. The thing that I'll just point out now is you can see here, this is the templating that I was talking about. So these values here, that begin with a double @ sign, will be templated by the tool. So by the time this hits the JSS, those will have actual useful data in them. But when it's sitting in version control, we just have the template variable, essentially. So I want to push the latest version of this script up to my JSS. Let's see if I can actually talk to the JSS. I'm connected to wireless. Oh, looking good. Okay. I'm slightly flying by the seat of my pants here because this is a beta instance on JAMF Pro, which is due to be deleted fairly soon. So hopefully it won't vanish in the middle of the demo. So if we go to the scripts area here on the JSS, you'll see that I've got a couple of demonstration scripts, like test1.py. Now this tool is in no way reliant on your scripts being in Python. These could be shell scripts, these could be Lisp scripts or Perl scripts. It doesn't care what language the script is in. That's irrelevant to the tool. So you can see here, this has actually had the treatment already. So in my notes field, and it's not very easy to see perhaps, but in my notes field I have the git log from version control of all the changes that have ever been made to this script. I did wonder, I'm sure people will wonder, is it possible to overload that field? The answer is I don't know. I did check in the database on a local JSS, and in the SQL database, the type of that field is a maximum size of 2 gig. So you're probably not going to hit that with your git changelog. You might run into other problems long before you hit that. I have no idea whether it's the same on JAMF Cloud. But so, supposing, so if I have a look at the script again, you can see here, I'll hit edit just so that it is a bit clearer to see. Oh, the networking here is very slow. You can see here these values that I was talking about have been templated in. So this date is actually, and this is not reliant on the tag at all, this is actually the date that this script was last changed, which is kind of a useful thing to know. This will tell you the tag, so the actual tag that I pushed up at this point was test2. And this will tell you where in version control to go and look for the script, which is handy if you have multiple repositories. And then this says which user was it that I actually used to push the script to the server. So, to show you in action, live demo. All right. So we have the command git to JSS. Incidentally, it's on pip, so you can install it just by typing pip install git to JSS. It's already installed, but it'll tell me that. So that's just telling me that it is already installed. But you can do that from any machine that has pip installed on it, and you'll get hopefully the latest version, assuming I've pushed it up there. So the command has various options, which I'm not going to go into in great detail just now, but you can run it -h, and it will tell you various things about how to use it. You can, the first time you run it, it will ask you for a username and password to configure talking, and a JSS URL to configure talking to your JSS. Now at the moment, this is very important to remember, it stores the password in clear text in a preferences file. This is, I know, bad. It will shortly have a mode that allows you to not type that in advance and just type it in every time and not store it. But it's the default behavior of the Python JSS API module that I'm using underneath. But if you type JSS info, it will tell you what JSS you're talking to and what username you're using to talk to it. What I would quite like to do in future is have support for multiple JSSs being configured, so you could say deploy to dev, deploy to live, without having to reconfigure it in between times. At the moment, it will only talk to one JSS at once. So supposing I want to, just to avoid having to type it, I'm going to say this. So supposing I want to deploy my core config software update run.py file up to my JSS. So ---- file says that's the local file that I want to push up. If the file has exactly the same name on the JSS, if the JSS script has exactly the same name, you don't need to specify a name. But if the script on the JSS is called something else, you can specify that here. So I'm saying I want to push this up to a script called macAD 2018 test.py. And I want to push up version 0.0.49, which in our case is not the most recent version by any shout. But one of the really nice things about this is it allows you to really quickly reverse a change, go back to the previous tag, or in your dev environment, pull up a tag from several weeks ago because you want to check something out. So ignore the foundation plist complaint, that's just because I'm running in a Python virtual env. So hopefully it will be able to contact the JSS. The wireless network in here was causing problems when I was testing this out earlier. If it doesn't work, you've seen basically what it does. The other option that you have, all right, here we go, so it says loading it, so this is it loading it from the JSS. Normally this takes like a second, this whole process. I think the wireless is just being a little slow at the moment. So there we go, so it's templating in the values. And hopefully in a moment it will say it succeeded. There we go. So it says saved it to the JSS. So we now have a look at that script. It's not that one, it's the other one. So if I now have a look at 2018 test.py, which is the script that I just forced click, the script that I just pushed up, hopefully we will see it's hard to see this without clicking edit. But yeah, we can see here all the most recent info has been templated in there. So the actual last change date of this script happens to have been, or at least the last change date for that tag, happens to have been December the 1st, 2016. You can see it's saying it's version 0.49, it knows where it's coming from, and it knows who released it, which was my test user. So this, I think, is really quite handy. It allows us to do quite rapid development. The reason I really wanted it was because I was testing scripts locally on the machine. I was then copying them to one JSS, doing a bit of testing, copying them to another JSS, doing a bit of testing, and in that I was missing out having them in version control. And so I was realizing I'd made a whole bunch of changes. I wanted to roll some of them back, but I hadn't committed them. And what you can do using this tool is really easily make a bunch of changes, commit them to version control, push it up to your JSS, roll them back, roll them forward, move them from one JSS to another JSS. What I didn't show you is that there's also an option of --create that you can add. And if you add that option, it will create the tag for you. So the tag doesn't have to exist. It will create it, push it to your version control, and then push the script up to the JSS. I don't think I've got any more slides, but just in case I do, let's go back to here. So there we go. That's really what I wanted to show you. Hopefully that's been helpful. So there's the two links to things. They're both on my GitHub. They might move to the University of Edinburgh GitHub at some point shortly, but if they do, I'll leave a breadcrumb trail so that you can find them. I'm very happy to take feature requests, bug fixes, anything like that. And yeah, GetJSS, if you have pip configured on your machine, you can literally just type pip install GetJSS, and it will install all the required dependencies, and you'll get it. Cool.
Anyone has got any questions? One there. You first.
Cool. First of all, very well done.
Thanks.
It looks like something that we could definitely use, and we're using GitLab for our version control, trying desperately. And unfortunately, yeah, the one of the things that we were struggling with was then connecting that with the JSS. And I believe there was a tool before made by Inception, maybe. I don't know if you had researched this. That was taken down. No idea why. No idea what happened. But one of the things I was wondering is, are you using the API? Are you just going to the page?
Yeah, it uses the API. So underneath it uses, there's a Python module called Python JSS by Shia Craig, which it has seen any development for a couple of years, but it's there, it's in pip, it's on GitHub, and it does everything this needs. And yeah, that's just lovely. For if you're programming in Python, it wraps certainly all the API calls that existed a couple of years ago, and makes it really simple to write tools like this. You know, I mean, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants hugely in terms of the actual amount of stuff I had to write to make this work.
And then presumably you're disabling the ability to edit scripts on the JSS itself.
Yeah, so that's the idea, is you can build this into a process where by default users don't have the ability to edit scripts on the JSS, but you have a separate user account which you come in with via the API to actually deploy scripts.
No, fantastic. Well, I'm definitely going to be looking at it. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, there's some great stuff there. I love the cover stuff, especially. I think you can make use of that in my environment. I was wondering, I've done some work around trying to integrate Git and the JSS for myself as well. I was wondering if you looked into webhooks at all from Git, so that automatically when you tag to release, it could all get pushed into the JSS. My problem with that was then checking whether what was in the JSS was in sync with what was on Git.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it, in short, but mostly just due to time constraints and the fact that I don't actually manage the service. So yeah, I mean, I could. The nice thing about this was that it doesn't have any kind of external dependencies. You know, I could just do it using my user account. I don't have to configure anything on the JSS. But yeah, I think that would be really interesting. And I'm sure people in big environments, I imagine people in really big environments must have hooked webhooks into some sort of continuous integration and have all that sort of stuff working. The angle that I was coming at it from is really, hopefully, trying to make the process simple for people around our institution to sort of engage with. So the angle I was coming at it from was slightly different. I'm a little bit nervous about automatically deploying stuff from Git repositories. But yeah, I think webhooks, I think, are probably the answer to some of the stuff around actual sort of change logging on the JSS as well. You know, if you use a webhook to log to some external thing every change that's going on, then you can probably do some sensible analysis on that. I know there are people who have solutions to do that, but again, that requires other infrastructure and configuration and things, which was kind of out of scope for what I was doing.